What's up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Facts on the Ground. I'm Jesse Zerwell, and I'm joined, as always, by my co-host, Misty Winston. And today we have a guest, a return guest, Robbie Jaeger. He is the lead financial investigative financial reporter for MCSC Network. He has written a lot on campaign finance, dark money, and recently he's been investigating the Colonial pipeline, which I'm sure a lot of you have heard about. It's been in the news. Robbie was one of the first journalists on the story, and he's really been keeping up to date with it about the spillage, about the amount of spillage, about the lies surrounding the spillage. So we're going to get an update from Robbie today on that, and we're really psyched to have him back on the show.
Well, thanks, guys, for having me back, man. Yeah, it's funny. We've been talking about Colonial specifically, regarding the spill, which we'll talk about again. Uh, but for months now, and
Hmm.
now all of a sudden, boom! Now it's a
Yeah.
household name, right? Everybody knows about Colonial Pipeline, just not for the
For the right
reasons that we've
reasons.
been talking
Yeah.
about,
Mhm.
Well, I
which is
remember the first day
completely.
it started trending. Yeah, yeah, like we were all talking in the DMs like, "Wait, is Colonial trending for you?" "Yeah, it's trending for me." "Is it trending for you?" And then we look and it's like, "Oh, but not for the right reasons."
No,
Mhm.
for something completely
Yeah.
different, which I'm sure we'll talk about today.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. I mean, we might as well get that. Let's just get the talk about the elephant in the room. I mean, recently, as some of you may have seen, the Colonial Pipeline experienced a, I don't know, what do you call it?
Paroxysm.
A hack.
they called it a
Uh,
cyber attack.
A
That's what they
cyber
called it.
attack? Okay, that's what they're calling it. Who really knows what the fuck happened? But that's why Colonial was in the news. They had a cyber attack that supposedly was so bad that they had to shut it down for 3 days, which actually they didn't really need to. So yeah, let's just go ahead and talk about that. What is this whole cyber attack thing? What supposedly happened?
Okay, so I would like to preface everything we're about to talk about right now. We must understand uh, is reliant upon the word of either anonymous sources within the federal government or Colonial Pipeline, or anonymous sources in the form of dark web posted news releases from anonymous so-called cyber gangs by the press or whatever. um uh, Case in point, really nothing in this entire story can be verified, and it's literally just the words of intelligence officials and cybersecurity firms, which, as we all know, come from intelligence agencies by default. So, with all that being said, the official story is Colonial Pipeline last Thursday. I want to say, had was alerted to a cyber attack or a ransomware attack on them, and shut down their pipeline. And so, and just right then and there, that's where the story of it starts getting fuzzy, right? So you start to hear at first that they had to shut the pipeline down because of the ransomware attack. And then you start to hear other rumblings come out that say, well, no, the hack itself didn't affect the operations of the pipeline. It was just shut down as a precaution. That the cyber attack really only ransomed their business side of things, such as accounting information, payroll, emails, stuff like that. Excuse me. Um, and that they shut other stuff down as a precaution. Uh, Now, at the same time, you've got conflicting stories again, which is always like, you know, which I guess we'll get to in a second, because I don't want to confuse the issues. But while we're sitting here thinking, okay, they're just being overly cautious, and the pipeline wasn't actually operationally hurt by the cyber attack. Uh, and then we get reporting from a fantastic scoop by an independent journalist named Kim Zetter, who reported that she had sources that were telling her that Colonial Pipeline actually, one of the reasons they shut the pipeline down was because that the ransomware affected their billing system, which means they could not get paid or accurately invoice their customers that were getting the fuel from them. And until that was remedied, they weren't going to be sending any more fuel, essentially. So we can just stop there for a second and think about the situation and say, okay, it's funny that this narrative was Colonial Pipeline was being held ransom by Eastern European cyber terrorists or whatever the hell they wanted to call them. But in reality, even though Colonial Pipeline is, even as like Tuesday or Wednesday of this past week, were denying that they were paying, that they were going to pay the ransom. Apparently, they paid the ransom. About $5 million in crypto, Friday night, like the day after the hack. Like they were on it, or just hours after, according to one report. So nothing is adding up already. We're not being honest about anything. A Colonial isn't at all. And you can already see that. I mean, but this is something I've been trying to tell people for forever now, is that Colonial, that what obfuscating the truth is their MO. Like that's what keeps them in business. But so you've got them lying about the fact about why they had to shut the pipeline down. You got them lying about paying the ransom, right? Which is its own problem, by the way. Because they're going to use that as an excuse to regulate the hell out of cryptocurrency. That's going to happen. I mean, you've been hearing Whitney Webb talk about it, and Steve and the gang over at Slow News Day. They're absolutely right when they say that. But so when Colonial shut down the pipeline, it was purely because, I mean, at first, sure, I'm willing to buy the cautionary part for a half second. But then when you start telling me about the billing system being locked up and they can't invoice customers, that starts to make way more sense, because if caution was Colonial's MO, then they would be taking way more care of their infrastructure that's leaking all over the Southeast. Caution doesn't really seem to be something they're concerned with, but money absolutely is.
Mm-hmm. And it seems like from a risk reward point of view, that it probably costs them less to shut down the pipeline temporarily than it does to put all of their financials at risk. Some money is better than none, so to speak.
And but see, that's just it. It's that Colonial Pipeline and most of these pipelines, but Colonial in particular, let's just face it, it's the most important pipeline probably in the country, just because of the sheer amount of volume of fuel that it provides for multiple states in the Southeast, all up the Eastern Seaboard, from Texas to New Jersey. And in my many visits to this show in particular, we've discussed, the hypothesis has been brought up. Well, why don't we just shut it down? And I've always said is because you can't shut it down, and we saw why, right? We just got to we've seen why before, back in 2016 when there was an extended shutdown because of an explosion that they had in Alabama. But we quickly forget things like that.
Yes.
So we just got a refresher as to why Colonial Pipeline just can't, like, why they have power.
Not overnight, for sure. You're right. Like, we need to start working towards that being a possibility, but it's not right now.
Right. Exactly. And that's the way, I mean, it's the reality of the situation is that, the gas shortage was caused by mostly because of Colonial Pipeline's greed, and they could not get paid. So in turn, we weren't going to get any gas. And I'm sorry, but that sounds like they're holding the East Coast for ransom. It doesn't sound like they're being held for ransom at all. It seems like they're holding us for ransom. And that's exactly what they've done. And again, like they weren't honest about any of it. Apparently, U.S. government officials knew about the Bitcoin payout, and they found out about this before Jen Psaki is out in front of the White House press corps telling them that it's a private sector issue and they don't know, or whatever bullshit they were spinning on this issue. But yeah, I mean, look, this is the oil industry and Colonial reaping what they've sown. They've spent years and years and years fighting against mandatory cybersecurity regulations from the federal government. That's not to say that they have pushed against or lobbied against every cybersecurity bill that has ever come through Congress, because it is the view of the American Petroleum Institute and the International Association for Natural Gas. They are, you know, they're in the camp of, yeah, sure, as long as the information that we have to share with the federal government is on a voluntary basis, um, and as long as the regulations that govern cybersecurity, as long as we get to continue writing our own rules, uh, they're pretty much open to anything else. So there was a bill that was going to give the EPA a little bit more oversight, or I'm sorry, the Department of Energy a little bit more oversight over cybersecurity planning and technology development and stuff like that. Um, and I've reached out to several of the companies that lobbied the bill to see what their stance was on it. It's dead. It never went. It passed through committees, but it died at the end of the last session. But the point is that as long as the federal government isn't mandating specific thresholds that these companies have to meet as far as quality of cybersecurity or technology that they use, they're more or less just, they don't care, because as long as the ball stays in their court, they don't really care what the government does, because again, it's all on a voluntary basis. If Colonial Pipeline doesn't feel like telling the government that they were hacked, they literally don't have to. And there's a huge gap in reports whenever, like, databases that hold this information as far as pipeline being hacked or cyber attacks on pipelines and stuff like that, a lot of times they go unreported. So, that's where we're at now. But whenever you do that for years now, and you keep pushing and pushing for lax, cybersecurity regulations, or you keep pushing to write your own rules and also have been wrong every step of the way, this is what happens. I mean, this is, no matter what, even if you want to throw out the narrative, like, oh, I mean, this could all be
It
an
seems
op.
like self-destruction.
It would.
It seems
Kind
like you're
of.
setting
It's
yourself
just
up for
greed, though.
self-destruction.
But they
Yeah.
think they know best. They think they know best, and they always do, but they're always wrong. And that's the thing, is the government allows them to continue to
I think
have
they're
this
just
power.
letting their greed get in the way of rational thinking. It's like, we just want the money, and so this is the fastest way to get to the most money, and we don't care if it's like taking shortcuts or whatever. I find it fascinating that a pipeline can claim to be, under cyber attack, and they don't have to report it, they don't have to talk about it. It's like the DNC, gets to hire CrowdStrike to take a look at their servers, and the FBI doesn't get to. That's fucking crazy. I mean, this is a major pipeline in the United States of America. It's a huge part of our infrastructure, and they can get claimed to be under cyber attack, and nobody gets to examine that or investigate it or anything like that. That's nuts to me. I mean,
Yeah.
that should be something that's thoroughly investigated, at the
Absolutely.
highest levels.
But it won't
Robbie,
be. Yeah.
so this cyber attack definitely happened. We're not talking about something that's been put out there and been unverified.
Right.
Okay.
Well, look, well, whenever you say unverified, I mean, it's like there's only a certain level of evidence we're ever going to get. Colonial Pipeline said they were. The FBI and a bunch of intelligence agency linked cybersecurity firms have all confirmed it. And unfortunately, again, we're in a situation where we just have to take their word for it or not, And so, look, I'm sure something happened, but the timing is just awfully convenient.
Convenient
And
as fuck.
and also the Colonial Pipeline isn't going to pay any kind of price for this,
No.
at all. The only people that are going to end up paying a price for this are Bitcoin investors, or crypto investors in general. Because again, what they're going to do is say, we're going to have a cyber, some kind of cyber pandemic, or there's going to a ransomware epidemic, and ransomware, they want their payments through untraceable currency like Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies, and they're going to use that as an avenue to crush crypto with regulations, and stuff like that. I mean, that's going to be the big loser out of all of this. Again, apparently the group that did the supposed hack was DarkSide. Again, people that have heard of the SolarWinds hacks, there was That was apparently the group linked to that as well. How they operate, allegedly, is they develop ransomware and then they sell it or lease it out to other groups that they deem worthy or whatnot, and then that group takes the ransomware and does what they will with it. So I guess they put out this little statement that Cyber Reason, this cybersecurity firm that was hired by Colonial Pipeline, or one of them, allegedly found on the dark web, that I'm paraphrasing, but basically said, we're not state actors. We don't want to cause chaos. We just want money. This was basically a mistake. We didn't realize it was going to have such a huge impact. And whatever. Again, like, there's nothing about this story that can be verified by the likes of us, which is unfortunate, because like with the spill, like I've been covering, I can verify the amount of miles of pipes that they've inspected. I can verify certain aspects to and just like any other journalistic story that doesn't depend on access. This is the double-edged sword of access journalism. We if it wasn't abused, it would be easier to believe, but every story is based on like anonymous sources, and so many of them have been debunked or come to find out have been outright false. So now when we see stories based off of anonymous sources or intelligence-based sources, of course you're going to look at it with a side eye at the very least, because that's their job. They've lied to us every chance they get. So why stop now? It's just a strange story from front to back. It really is.
None of it makes sense, really. It just doesn't. It's very random.
I may have a corrective to some of this anonymity coming up, developing in the future. So I'll be in touch with you about that.
Yeah, but I do want to talk a little bit about. I do want to talk a little bit about the fact that although it is all very convenient and it does somewhat take away attention from, to me, the more important story. It did get people talking about Colonial Pipeline, and we have now seen a lot of reporting about the pipeline in general. We did our very best to hijack the hashtag and get people talking about the spill instead of talking about the cyber attack, which I think we were successful in some ways. But there's been, what is some of the report? I know there was one guy that I saw you retweet from Bloomberg. I want to say like Javier Blas. I'm sorry, dude, if I'm pronouncing your name wrong. But at least there are some people talking about. He went through the whole fact that it's the cash cow aspect and the Coke industries and all of that stuff. So at least we're getting a little bit of the backstory now about the financial aspects out into the what is some of the other reporting that you've seen that is more focused on maybe the financial aspect or even the spill. I haven't seen a ton about the spill from other sources other than us.
Well, here's the thing. I retweeted that article, and obviously I retweeted the scoop that guy from Bloomberg had about the cryptocurrency and the ransom being paid, because that was a major development. And that's a huge thing, by the way. But and then, of course, it was nice to see, even though, like, again, if people have been paying attention to our reporting, they would know that Koch Industries is the majority stakeholder in Colonial Pipeline. They would know Royal Dutch Shell has a huge stake in it as well. But, of course, Colonial Pipeline gets really big, starts trending. Now everybody knows its name. So now we're going to have to write articles that kind of, I guess, break the news that, hey, Koch Industries is the big investor here. And again, as far as reporting on the spill, I haven't seen any. Literally any and all of the many mainstream media outlet articles and or video bumps that they've done on this story, none of them mention that Colonial Pipeline is currently under federal investigation for the spill in Huntersville, North Carolina. Which could break the record for the largest in U.S. history. It could when it's all said and done. We'll know in a couple of weeks. So, I find that extremely troubling that it's like, literally nobody shows up whenever Colonial needs to be critiqued or criticized or brought in front of, excuse me, the negative attention is on them. But whenever they need to be defended from the mean old cyber gangs, Now we've got every major outlet in the country pulling up to defend them, and paint them as a victim. And I think this is the thing too with whether or not the hack itself was a false flag or an inside job or just completely false, never happened. Regardless of any of that, the attention that's going to come or that has already came from it, while not the greatest, right? I mean, these pipeline companies, I feel like they're the way they think is the less people know about us, the better. So
Mm-hmm.
being in the news, I'm not going to say that they're liking all of this attention, but at least they get to paint themselves as a victim, right? And we were attacked, like we were held for ransom. They get to say that instead of we spilled millions of gallons of gasoline into a nature preserve and we kind of covered it up for months and months and we still don't know how much it is. Like that sounds like a very different story. So I think that Colonial Pipeline basically in this case they know that that they have new results that are their deadline is the 28th. Um, either they're hoping that this story comes and goes, and it kind of already has, if you haven't noticed, that it was the hottest thing on planet Earth for like 4 or 5 days, and now it's nothing, right? Because it's restarted, the fuel's starting to slowly get back to the gas stations here in North Carolina, and stuff like in Virginia, and there's not so much talking about Colonial Pipeline anymore. So they're either hoping the wave passes or that any attention that they have can be redirected towards the cyber attack. And then hopefully this little spill thing, this little teeny spill thing kind of gets, lost in the shuffle. I'm thinking that's what they're hoping,
I
Yeah.
kind of wonder
Well,
if they're hoping that they can use it as a source of like management, like managing the narrative so that when they have to come out with their new numbers, they can say, Colonial Pipeline was a victim of a cyber attack and then like kind of bury the lead of, all of the
Yes.
other
yeah.
stuff, all the other
Or
bullshit.
or
So, you know what I'm
say
saying? Like be able to,
that what data they had with regard to the spillage has been compromised by the hack. So we have to start at ground zero again. And
Yeah. I
Robbie,
mean,
I wanted to ask you on top
yeah.
of that, how much of what's happening, especially with Colonial, do you think has to do with the fact that pipelines and pipeline spills especially have been essentially normalized in the US, and it's just expected that if there's a pipeline, something's going to happen.
Yep. And
There's no urgency.
it's funny that you say that because last night I was actually able to come across a archived video, very long, very boring archived video, by the way, of a 2-day teleconference that the DOT's Pipeline and Hazardous Materials Safety Administration had like a 2-day conference on pipeline leak detection methods and spills and stuff like that. And it was just a few days ago, so the video finally became available. So I was going through it, and one of the opening remarks that was made was that they, you know, the idea that there's an acceptable level of volume to be spilled is at best an antiquated one, and at most, and just completely absurd. And that small spills do add up, and they're just as important as the big spills. But as you mentioned, Jesse, this is exactly the mindset that the U.S. government and pipeline companies have taken for years and years, is that pipelines are gonna spill, but that's normal, right? They're not gonna. I mean, hell, they won't cover it unless there's it literally takes like a Deepwater Horizon event. It takes something like the
Exxon
BP oil
Valdez.
spill.
it takes
It
birds covered in oil,
Yes, I mean,
you know.
it takes literally catastrophic level events
And even
for
then,
the news to give a crap. You know what I'm
even
saying?
Hmm.
even then, even then, it's like after a few days, the news gets irritated that it still has to cover it, even though with Deepwater Horizon, for example, we would see pictures as they're whining about having to cover it, basically, of oil just funneling into the Gulf of Mexico. And
Yeah.
it's like, what kind of world is this?
You
As
know,
Adrian Rich wrote.
so I would say this, I've been looking into, I mean, Congress passed the Pipes Act, last year, which part of is basically mandates PIMSA, the body I was just mentioned, the agency, to basically rewrite their rule book pretty much on how they expect pipeline companies to inspect their pipes, as far as updating the codes basically that they have not updated in years and years and years. So there are changes incoming that they have to be implemented by the 27th of this year. I know that's a ways off, and we can't retroactively use them to go back and stop what Colonial Pipeline has done. But hopefully there will be some change on the horizon. The only problem here is that, oil and gas lobby, the trade associations, the API, the AGA, they're all going to be involved in writing these rules with regulators. And their voices are very loud. Like, I mean, as I've said before, Colonial Pipeline, one of their executives has a seat at PIMSA's rules advisory committee. She's one of 15 people on that committee. And I'm just saying that Colonial Pipeline's voice is very important to the federal government. As you can see, Colonial Pipeline needed them. They called them, and they all, like every agency, mobilized at Colonial Pipeline's request. The Biden administration was writing executive orders. Governor Roy Cooper here in North Carolina was issuing states of emergencies. I have a bone to pick with a lot of someone in the media that were kind of trying to blame the citizens here for panic buying as the reason why there was a gas shortage for a few days. The way I look at that is that, again, I'm in tune to these types of things. I got an SMS alert as soon as Colonial Pipeline got released the information that they had been hacked. This was Thursday. I was at work, and at first I didn't see or know how severe it was, but I knew when I got home that day. I told everybody in my house, take your car to the gas station and top it off, because it's about to get crazy for a few days. And it did, obviously. But, whenever you find out as just a normal person that's not in tune to these things, you turn on the news, you turn on radio, whatnot, and you get the alert that, hey, the pipeline that carries half the amount of fuel to the southeast just got shut down, and we don't know when it'll be back up. It's not panic buying to go to the gas station and fill up your cars and maybe like even a gas can or whatever. Like, that's not panic buying. That's called being a logical person that just wants to be prepared. Now, yes,
but that's contingent upon knowing what's happening. And I mean, these spills have been normalized.
Right.
So
no, he's talking about the cyber attack.
I kind of did get off. I kind of got off subject for a minute there, but I'm just saying, we saw, there were people filling up like Rubbermaid containers full of gasoline, and of course, that wasn't. It's gonna go bad. Yeah. By the way, I don't know what you're doing, because it does go bad. It doesn't last forever. But,
and the way the media covers it, the fear mongering,
right,
and the way that it's like this hyperventilating. Of course, people are going to panic.
And then you're going to blame them for the gas shortage. It's like, no, how about you blame Colonial Pipeline that they can't keep their shit going? And they've got a history of just sucking at everything from obviously cybersecurity to spilling. And again, it's been like nobody's talked about the spill whenever we're talking about the cyber attack. They're under federal investigation for maybe the largest spill in history. Is that, even if that has nothing to do with the cyber attack story, you don't even think that's worth just passively mentioning?
Should have been covering that for months, Robbie. People should have been covering this for months. There's no excuse for this. If you are in the news business, or if you're a content creator, or whatever you consider yourself, and you're not covering perhaps the largest spill in history, there's something wrong with you. That's not. This is the story. This is news. It's huge.
But it's also that, as JC said, it's been normalized, and that's why nobody talks about it. Is because, again, what's the difference between I mean, there's no massive, like, there's no big footage you can put on the screen
Right.
like that. Like, even that 600 gallons that Chevron refinery spilled into the bay a couple of months ago, San Francisco Bay. You know, that little spill got coverage all over the country. Because it happened in a blue state, it happened in California, obviously. But there was that footage, right? It was that shocking stuff. You can see it. There's nothing to see with the Colonial spill because Colonial has got it locked down like a fucking space shuttle or UFO landed there, right? You can't get in and out of there. I mean, it's ridiculous. There's been like 2 or 3 news crews allowed to be on site in the last 8 months. Like that, it's crazy, and PIMS, like regulators have spent years and years just ignoring the little things and allowing little spills to go on. Like, again, like I've mentioned numerous times, whenever I'm drawing comparisons to like Dakota Access Pipeline, which is again one of the most notorious pipelines in the country that people actually know about, and as much as hype as that gets, it hasn't had an incident reported to federal regulators since May of last year. In that time, Colonial Pipelines had 10 such incidents. They've had over 60 incidents reported since the beginning of 2017. You know, and they're not even the worst ones, but it's so bad for them because they're so big. I mean, if that makes any sense. Like,
Yeah.
the way that PIMSA tracks spills and incidents, and whenever they're kind of like listing the top, like the best pipelines, it's like incidents per mile. Well, obviously, Colonial Pipeline has got more miles than most pipelines, so they can get away with more incidents and still not look in aggregate like they're doing so poorly. But in fact, they're one of the most egregious ones. So
Yeah.
yeah, I feel like, we need to get to a place where, we need to, I don't know. I just, it baffles my mind how it doesn't get coverage when we've got, groups like Sunrise Movement and 350 Sierra Club. And I know that I'm banging my head against the wall here, but like, then you've got politicians that are literally running on a platform of environmentalism and climate change.
Where's Bill
Like
McKibben?
AOC, Ed Markey. Yeah, where is
Oh,
Bill
come on,
McKibben?
Jesse. He wrote his sentence. He wrote his
Yeah,
sentence in his little
yeah.
blog. It's
He wrote a
fine. That's all we
he
need.
wrote
How many words was it?
it was about
I
the
don't
length
know.
of a tweet. It
Okay.
was
Yeah.
about the
Maybe
length. It
not
was
even that.
about the length of the tweet that he sent Misty, telling
Yeah.
her that he would
That
try
he
to
would
look
cover
into
it.
it. Yeah,
Which,
it
I
was
mean,
about this.
listen,
Yeah,
credit to him for responding, I guess,
I,
because most people just ignore me on that.
but
But yeah,
yeah,
oh, I'm so sorry. I missed it in all of everything else that's going on. And I'm like, okay, like I get it. There's a lot going on. I could buy that. No, dude wrote 2 sentences at like the end of his little blog post or whatever.
he
He's
Or
so
looked
weak
Greta
and
into
pathetic.
it.
Thunberg. Where's
No,
Greta
he
Thunberg?
literally
Yeah.
looked into
Where's
it and
Greta?
decided that he didn't give a fuck. I mean,
Yeah.
that's the way. That's what Bill McKibben did. And you had to, because in order for you to write even those 2 sentences would require you to at least read the article or read an article, look up onto it, and you actually looking at all the information and be like, yeah, this doesn't matter to me.
Yeah.
So I
Yeah.
mean,
Bill McKibben's like the David Sirota of environmental
Yeah.
politics.
don't get me started.
Oh, it's a burn.
That's,
Oh, brutal. I
I
did
don't
want to ask you, you tweeted out something yesterday and I wanted to ask you about it because I'm not sure I quite understand.
sure.
Okay, so it says update. When I obtained Colonial Pipeline's 2020 financial report, I did so from their website, which at the time had a financial section where it was posted. Since the hack, Colonial has changed the section to investor relations, locked the documents, and deleted the old links. So what does that mean exactly? Does that mean like when you first started covering it, you were able to go and look at all their financial reports
Yeah.
and all of that stuff? And since then, they have now locked all that down, and now you are no longer able to access that information. Is that
That's
yes?
exactly right.
That's fucked
Even
up.
as far back as February, um, and that's the last time I looked because I mean it's a quarterly thing. Um, but yes, there was a section on Colonial Pipeline's website. It was just simply labeled financials, and whenever you went there, they posted their quarterly reports every quarter, and so you would get quarter 1, 2, 3, 4, and you get your annual, all their financial stuff. All of their audited financial statements. But since the hack, and I'm not sure if you guys knew, but briefly, even though they said it was unrelated to the hack, their website went down completely, and then reemerged like about 20 hours later, which I found funny because whenever it reemerged, it had one of those CAPTCHA, like "I'm not a robot," right?
Oh.
Um, and somebody was like, "Oh, the hackers are definitely screwed now," right? 100%, they're fucked up now. It's not gonna work.
Gotcha.
Gotcha. That's what they should rename it. Instead of CAPTCHA, they should just name it Gotcha.
Gotcha.
Because once you
Yeah.
get like click every picture with the street lights, I give up. I give up.
And and who comes up with the codes and the pixelation? Even as
Right,
a
it's ridiculous.
38-year-old man, I'm bugging out trying to see. Yeah.
I
Well,
know. Some of them are
but-
really bad.
But I noticed just the other day, or like just yesterday, really, that hey, it's about time for first quarter. What reminded me was Soros Fund Management. I actually got an alert that their first quarter investment numbers came out, and I was like, oh shit, that means it's probably time for Colonial to do the same, even though it's two completely kind of different things. But it's just that time of year, and so I
Right.
went back and I was like, okay, something about this website is different. All right, it doesn't. Where's the finance? Oh, it says investor relations. Okay, cool. So I clicked on that. And then it's like, we are excited that, as a bondholder, that you're wanting to know more about the investment side of this company. So send us all of your information, name, address, email address, all that kind of stuff. And we'll verify that you actually are an
Vial of
investor.
blood.
You have your DNA, the hair of your firstborn child,
Social security number. Yeah.
and so yeah. And then I was like, okay, that's different. So and you would hate that it's like, okay, well, apparently the hacker group in question, they go over your financials. That's how they pick your target, from reading your financial statements and seeing all your income information. So is that going to be an excuse that Colonials, like, I mean, they got it from your own website, dude, or are they going to blame journalists like us that report on it? I don't know, but yeah, it is definitely true that Colonial Pipeline has removed all of their financial statements from their website, and not only that, they have killed the old links that used to link to them. So in my initial report from February, when I kind of just broke, it wasn't even really a big old breakdown. It was just a couple of tweets that just went over a couple of key points from the audit. Even the link, but in those tweets, I linked to the actual full report that Colonial had. Those links are now dead. So I actually still have the report. So because I keep my receipts always. But yeah, like the whole section is down, and so I guess as far as we'll know, as much as we'll know about Colonial's finances will have to be from the end of last year, and unfortunately, this hack just gave them a reason to be even more opaque and more secretive about their business practices. Because they haven't filed a SEC filing in over a year, over 2 years almost. So, I mean, we're not going to get much information from there. The only places you might be able to find some like residual information, like I can look up how much money Shell is making from their ownership stakes in Colonial. But as far as like Colonial specifically business type of like really intricate details, you're not going to get it from the SEC. The only way we were getting it was through Colonial, and now they've pulled the plug on that. So that's a
That's
loss
not shitty
for
at all.
journalists.
Do you think, Robbie, there's an argument to be made for the fact that the spillage is damaging to the public? It's destroying public land. It's probably poisoning the public, and therefore Colonial ought to be demanded that Colonial release its financials because it has such a powerful relation to the public.
I'll take it a million steps further, Jesse. I would say that I find it 100% appropriate, given Colonial's past egregious problems, both in spills and obviously in just the way that they run their business. They need to be a full-blown investigation by the DOJ. They need to be brought in front of Congress. And I know, obviously, like as skeptics, us three have zero confidence in Congress, right? Or what they're going to do or say. But the fact of the matter is that they deserve the humiliation. They deserve to have to sit there for 8 hours a day on C-SPAN and answer countless questions from congressmen and women about just the unacceptable way that they've been running their business. Again, they deserve to be run through from top to bottom by the DOJ, and by the EPA, by any regular, by PIMSA especially. They need to be made an example out of, because the way that they've been doing business is not right. It's not okay. And the government has allowed them to do so for years and years. The media has allowed them to do so for years and years. And I say that because nobody, or almost nobody, even in the Southeast, where I live, where this was the biggest, where we had the most effect from this shutdown, almost nobody knew the name or what the hell Colonial Pipeline was until this past week. And that's journalists' fault. Right?
Yes.
Because had they been doing their job, people would know about the most corrupt and most powerful, obviously powerful pipeline company in the country. DAPL this, DAPL that, Keystone this, Keystone that. They are small fish. They're small fry. Like when we're talking about Colonial, it's not even close. It's not even close. Keystone Pipeline or Dakota Access, had they gone through a similar situation, would not have gotten the amount of, just overall governmental intelligence agency rushing to their aid. And also the effects of them shutting down would not have been as drastic as they were with Colonial.
I think DAPL was it blew up as much as it did because, well, all of the U.S. I consider indigenous land, but
right
in the modern context, so to speak, it was cutting through indigenous land and threatening a lot of resources. And I think, rightly enough, that's why it got the coverage it did. But yeah, there was really no information provided on exactly what this pipeline was, what it intended to do, where it intended to go. Maybe I missed that, but it seemed pretty vague. But I also think the government wanted to use it as an example to shut down not just indigenous resistance, but also any kind of alliances that indigenous people might form with people like you or me to stop this desecration, this destruction of the earth.
And when I say what I say about DAPL, I don't try to put down the DAPL movement or the anti-DAPL movement.
No,
right?
No, I don't get.
I'm not saying that at all.
I know you're not saying that, but what I'm really saying is that yes, there was a obvious indigenous land dispute that was going on, and they were. I mean, DAPL was just. And in the private security, like the protests, like the dogs attacking, like the rubber bullet, it was just it's utter insanity. Bullshit. Right.
Concussion grenades blowing off people's arms. Yeah.
Right. It was definitely something to protest. But in the years since, right, since that initial really like massive protest, and then of course, just like everything else, it eventually kind of simmers down. The focus still remains from activist groups and from the media. The focus still remains on DAPL. The focus still remains on Keystone. Meanwhile, Colonial Pipeline is the one. They're the big shots in the game. Enbridge is another one. That if their system, their big system shut down, it would be close to catastrophic. If the Enbridge system shut down. But Colonial Pipeline, like I said, nobody even knew who they were until this week, and that's shameful because they're the ones doing all the damage. And I guess that's the point. And that's the point I guess I'm making is that I'm not advocating for pipelines at all, but if we're going to rank them on a scale of like most dangerous to least dangerous, Colonial Pipeline is on the scale way higher than DAPL, way higher than Keystone. If we're talking about imminent environmental threats,
Well, just
you
the
have to
age of
start
the
that
pipes
with Colonial Pipeline.
alone.
Right.
The
And
age of the
they know
pipes
it.
alone is a problem. DAPL's a relatively newer pipeline, so
That's
they're not
right.
facing 40-plus-year-old pipes.
That's
The fact
exactly
that
right.
Colonial has 40-plus-year-old pipes and they're only required to check them like every 5 years and only a certain percentage, and then we don't even know if they really do that because they don't really keep accurate records of it. That's a problem.
It's
And
a
we're
huge
seeing that
problem.
now. The fact that they have this huge spill, and still nobody wants to talk about it. And
Well,
it's just crazy.
yeah, and again, it's the fact that it can't be politicized. Like it's not flashy, and we've seen like the media only
Mhm.
talks about stuff that it can get clicks from, that it can get views from. It's easier to bill an indigenous land dispute and politicize that, and if your activist group fundraise off of that, than it is to just say, um, there was a massive gas spill in an uninhabited area. There was no drinking water contamination. There was no tribal land disputes. It's just a case of a company having their negligence catch up with them, and basically putting a spotlight on the danger that they pose just as a company. Um, and, and that's not good enough for the
No.
media because they can't. It's not exciting. It's not an exciting story. It's just literally, you know, this is what happened and this is why it's a problem. But the problem is that the media treats this, and politicians as well treat this as a no harm, no foul situation. Um,
Hmm.
and that's a huge, huge problem because
Well,
there
maybe
is
this time is no harm, no foul. But what about next time? Because there's gonna be a next time.
well, you
And
have
I
to.
think that's been your point this whole time is that we have to address this now. Like now, like we have to use this right now, this huge spill, as a way to bring people's attention to this so that we can improve regulation so that this doesn't happen again in a more dangerous location.
Well, and but there's also the fact that Colonial, like I said, Colonial Pipelines had over 60 incidents since the beginning of 2017. It's like looking at somebody
That's crazy.
standing across from you with a gun, right? And they shoot at you, intentionally shoot at you, and the bullet whizzes by you, misses you. You look at the person as he's actively reloading his gun and say, "Hey man, no harm, no foul." As he's lifting it back up at you again and
Yeah,
continues to fire. It's like, are you going to just
that's
say
a
no
great
harm, no foul?
analogy.
Are you going to say
Yeah.
no harm,
Or
no
if you
foul every time a bullet whizzes by you when he's actively aiming at you? It's not his fault he can't shoot straight. The problem is that Colonial Pipeline is actively reloading and actively shooting, and and it's not their fault they can't shoot straight, but one day they might actually hit a target is the
right.
They're
point.
playing Russian
And if you
roulette with,
if
Absolutely.
society.
That's the
Yeah.
best way to put
and,
it.
and
Yes.
Yeah.
if you put it in the context of corporate personhood, then Colonial is a person. Imagine if a person committed 60 crimes, 60 plus crimes, and was still able to walk around freely. It
Yeah.
just doesn't make sense no matter how you frame it. It's cruel and unfortunately usual of both the government and the corporations that have essentially taken over the government. And I feel hopeless about it. I really do.
It's yeah.
Yeah.
It's literally it's a depressing story.
Hmm.
Honestly, I mean, because I've been covering it for months now, and it's like bringing me down, bro. Like a lot of it, because it's like the eerie, like almost just Twilight Zone, like silence that you're hearing from pretty much everyone, even the people that are supposed to care about this. Like, I don't understand. I mean, it could be like again, May 28th, Colonial Pipeline has to give their new estimates to state regulators in North Carolina about the new volume estimates of their spill in Huntersville. Those new numbers, like they say, they've already recovered almost 1.1 million gallons of the gas that they spilled, which was supposedly 1.2 million. So basically, they're saying that they've recovered 90% of their spill, which is unheard of, right? And almost impossible. So it's likely, again, the largest spill on record from a pipeline on U.S. soil is 1.68 million gallons from the line 3 that runs through Minnesota, 1991. It spilled about 1.68 million gallons. We're only about 500,000 gallons off of that. And I know that sounds like a lot, but the way the Colonial Pipeline's estimates continuously keep jumping, I mean, they could eclipse it. I mean, we could be looking at a 2 million gallon spill here. We don't know. And the problem is that once Colonial winds up telling us, well, they've been wrong or just outright lied about it so many times before. I mean, it's a boy who cried wolf scenario. I mean, how are we really supposed to believe you at this point? But yeah, I mean, it's a historic level spill, and people are treating it like it never even happened because there's no water, there's no drinking water contamination. Again, there's not 30,000 dead fish floating in the river.
Question.
Yeah.
I don't know if you'll know the answer to this or not, but it just popped into my head when you were discussing this. How long does it typically take for a company to get an estimate or to collect? Like, I'm just curious because it's taken, I mean, this is from August of 2020. And so we're almost a year out and we still don't have an estimate on how big this thing is. Is that typical or is it usually, because I don't really follow this stuff. So does it usually take that long or is this kind of like a phenomenon?
From what I've been able to gather, both in, like off record conversations with people in the industry or in, in regulatory roles, it varies because again, you don't have multi-million gallon spills that often, or even, spills that get up into that range that often. But what I have heard is that Colonial's handling of this situation is abnormally bad. Right. It's always normal with larger spills that your first estimate is always going to be low.
Sure.
And that second estimate, you almost always have to revise one time, maybe twice. But usually, while the biggest jump is between your first and second estimates, and then your third estimate, if you need one, while it probably will grow, maybe by not as much of a wide margin. I think the biggest red flag when we're looking at Colonial's estimate history isn't necessarily the jump from their initial 63,000 gallons to their second estimate of 250,000. That would look normal.
Mm-hmm.
I think the biggest red flag is the revision August, September, October, 4 months, so they took 4 months to give you the 250,000 gallon estimate, and then 2 months later they came back with the 1.2 million, right?
And there's no way there are people there
right.
just throwing darts at a board. This is done by these calculations are done by actuaries, by accountants, by risk analysts who are
all terrible at their jobs.
Right.
Yeah.
But I think
clearly,
I think they could calculate the financial loss, the numbers down to a T, but they're calculating in a different way, in a way that can minimize it, but also make it seem realistic. Again, to minimize the cost risk differentiation for Colonial.
I mean, yeah. I mean, and it would make total sense, even though, according to Colonial's own financial statements, which I looked through again last night just to refresh myself, they basically pay a $30 million deductible to get like $650 million in coverage on environmental damage insurance. So what are they? I mean, there's no way that this spill, as massive as it is going to cause $500 billion or $500 million in damage. So, they're insured, which is
right.
Who the fuck is writing these insurance policies, by the way? Like, that would be nice to know, right? Because that's insane. Like, that's your business model. Like, hey, fuck up the environment all you want. I got 500 mil on it. Like, what the hell is that? But that's a huge problem for me, though, coming from the 200. Like, it took you 4 months after the spill to get 250,000 gallons. 6 months after the spill, you're telling me that it's 1.125 million gallons. I don't understand how you got from. I understand how you got from A to B, but you lost me from B to C because
Mhm.
your third estimate should not have been so massively big. It should, I mean, if you would have come back and said, okay, we said 250, we really meant the final estimates are going to be around 400. I mean, yes, that's still a massive jump from 63, but again, you're getting smaller jumps from, A to B, B to C, and then, you finally get a number that sounds about right. Um, Nothing about this sounded anywhere close to right. I don't understand how they came up with that number in the beginning, or what they were thinking. And then, of course, again, like in April, they tell state regulators that, hey, obviously our number is too low. That's why we're waiting on the new numbers again. But hey, the technology we used to find these numbers, it's not exactly appropriate or accurate or anything. So again, like, do you even have the technology available to find out how much you spilled? Because you couldn't even
Right.
detect the spill yourself. And I think that's
Yeah, some
again something
teenagers.
I keep reiterating this point is that again, I know we've mentioned Dapple and Keystone, and I'm not trying to minimize them, but if you care about them and these are important issues to you, you need to start with Colonial, because if we don't make an example out of them and change the way that Colonial does business and tell the entire industry that if you operate like this company, then you won't be able to operate. And I'm going to bring up something my conservative friends shudder when they hear about, but corporate death penalty, right?
Mhm.
I mean, just because, like, I mean, honestly,
It's the only death penalty I believe in.
we might need that pipeline, right? Currently,
For
as things
now.
stands for now,
Yeah.
but it doesn't need to be owned by Colonial Pipeline Company. Um,
Give it to
Somebody
the
else,
people.
give it to the people. Like, look, there's a million different ways to do this, but Colonial, it look, because like again, as a realtor, as a former realtor, as people in law, people in the medical profession, they can all attest to this. If you screw up with the rate that Colonial screws up, um, they would take your fucking business license away. You would not be able to be a realtor. You would not be
Absolutely.
able to practice medicine. You would not be able to practice law. You would get your license revoked. So tell me why we allow oil companies to keep their licenses and keep operating in our country when they have proven time and time again that they cannot do it safely, and that they cannot write their own rules accurately, and that they're always wrong. They're always wrong
In
when it
the
comes to best practices. They're always wrong,
Yes.
and
and
they prove.
in the end, it comes back to the money, and that's I'm not saying that in a facetious way
Right.
or some kind of cliche way. It comes back to the capital for them and for those who support them, and it's also a way for those who are accumulating capital from something like Colonial Pipeline to shore themselves up for when things really hit, when shit really hits the fan.
Mm-hmm.
They'll have their finances. They'll be able to retreat to their bunkers or their Elysian clouds in the sky or wherever the fuck they go. It's not a problem for them. For them, it's about make as much material gain as we can, even if it means destroying the earth, even if it means poisoning people. And when doing that eventually makes this planet unlivable, we'll be okay because we have our money, we have our
Plan B.
resources, our plan B, right? And I think that plays into the reason why the government just doesn't care. I mean, how can you go from the numbers you mentioned and there's no government checkup on this? It's just, okay, we believe you. And then there are these drastic jumps.
Yeah.
It's it doesn't make sense unless you put it in the context of the government doesn't care and the government doesn't care in the service of capital for itself and for the corporations that play by
That
its
they
rule book.
serve.
And
Hmm.
yeah,
That they serve.
and to that end, shout out to somebody who was doing their job at the NC Department of Environmental Quality that noticed again that just like they have already done. Like I said, they say they've recovered 1.1 out of the 1.2 million. Well, the reason why the third estimate was even brought up was because somebody at the state regulator's office noticed that Colonial was reporting that they had recovered like over 90% of that supposed 250,000 gallons, and they looked at this and it just said that's just not possible.
Not possible.
That's just
yeah.
not right. It's not right. It's not possible. Nothing about this looks right. You need to give us new numbers. Again, they forced them to do that. Colonial would not have done that on their own, I don't believe, unless there was some
No.
kind of. Look, it's a terribly depressing story all the way around because you get ignored by politicians, you get ignored by media outlets that are even the ones that are supposed to care. You get ignored by activist groups that built their entire fundraising base off of the fact that they're running for climate change. I mean, that's what they're known as, environmental activists. And there's nothing. You just get nothing all the way around. And then you look at the macro, and you look at where are we really any closer to reform than we were, or what is the path forward? And while it's nice to hear PIMSA during that meeting say that we're looking at really cutting, really clamping down on a lot of these regulations towards the end of the year, where have you been for the last 20? Because again, when they come out with that federal report that says Colonial Pipeline is an imminent threat that has had a long history of of negligence and a long history of spills, and that have been exacerbated by that negligence, and the whole time it's like, hey, federal authorities have been here the whole time, whether in the form of PIMSA, in the form of the TSA, whatever.
Do you want to know what that reminded me of? A strongly worded letter.
Yeah, well, that's all, and that's where I'm getting at, is that during this whole time, Colonial was having this building the history of negligence and this history of spills. During this whole time, federal regulators were watching them do it and saying nothing.
And even with this now strongly worded letter, what are you doing aside from writing this strongly worded letter? What regulations are you you know what I mean? Like, what are you doing? Where's the action? Where's the hearing in Congress? When are we going to talk about what we do moving forward?
Well, I'm not. If you're going to hear any hearings in Congress about Colonial Pipeline, it's probably not going to be about spills. It's probably going to be all about cybersecurity, which is wrong, which is completely ass backwards.
Yes.
But also,
Russiagate is like herpes.
We won't
at this
point. We won't know about any new, like, how tight these regulations are going to be. These updated regulations, as far as federally, we won't really know until PIMSA really makes its rule changes confirmed.
Right.
This will be December of this year is when the congressionally mandated deadline from the passage of the Pipes Act last year. All the rules have to be in effect by December 27th of this year. So we'll see. We still have time to see by then. But again, as far as what's going to happen to Colonial, it's all speculation. I think there's too much attention on it now. And here's the thing. We at this network and a few other people that have been helpful in amplifying the story, Jimmy Dore, Redacted Tonight, Vanguard Boys, and of course everybody here on MCSC, everybody, and I mean it. We've busted our ass, and particularly us here, to get this story out, and I think it's working. It might not be showing up in NBC or Bloomberg articles or whatever, but generally people are starting to know about this spill, right, and know about. Equally as important, the federal government's, condemnation of the entire pipeline, basically how it's a ticking time bomb. I think that momentum is going to force a few hands before all is said and done. It's not like this spill has just slipped under. Too many people know about it now. Not enough people know about it, but we're trending in the right direction with the public. With the campaigns that we've had here, trying to just push this story and get it out there. And like I said, with the help from other platforms as well that we've gotten, I expect believe it or not, and I know that this might sound shocking because I'm putting my faith in a bureaucracy, but I expect a landmark fine um, from both state and federal regulators on Colonial Pipeline because of this. The problem is that Colonial Pipeline is a $1.3 billion company per year. And let's just face it, the fines that these agencies are legally able to give you are chump change.
Mhm.
Yeah.
In comparison to how much. I mean, even if they got slapped with like a $20 million fine, I mean, according to Colonial's financial statements, they're on the books already for $116 million in environmental damages and payouts and fines or whatnot, stemming from 40 incidents that they're just steadily paying out every year. They're just just making little payments like a fucking environmental death credit card that they have. I mean, honestly, that's basically what it is. They don't care.
Yeah.
They're
It's like
insured for most of it, and the rest of it, it's chump change.
it's
So
like when Apple was setting up shop in Ireland, and so it wouldn't have to pay taxes. And when it was fined for that, all the money they had accumulated from not paying taxes, like you said, it made the fine seem like chump change. So
exactly,
Yeah.
they paid the fine
It's
and
much
they
easier
went
for
on with
these companies
business.
to just pay their fines than to worry about following the rules. And that's
Mhm.
what needs to change.
so
And the
what?
government's
Um,
responsible for that because the government
yeah.
writes the legislation that implements those fines.
But
Yeah,
they're bought off by the lobbyists, which is the
and the
whole circle
lobbyists,
jerk of
well, yeah,
capitalism.
exactly, and the lobbyists help them write those
Hmm.
regulations. So they're writing their own rules and then breaking their own rules, and of course not getting punished because they're their own principle.
Right.
And and before I go, I would just like to add that one thing to watch is the DOJ, right? Now this is the one agency that is the hardest to read out of all of them that I've in my experience with dealing with these different government agencies. Most of them will talk to you in some way or another. The DOJ does not like to talk to you about anything. So I reached out to them because, again, I saw that in 2000 they had sued Colonial Pipeline for what they had called 20 years of spills and negligence. It's funny how the circle just keeps repeating itself. From spills that took place between 1980 and the year 2000, they wound up settling out of court in like 2003 for like $38 million or whatever. It was a pretty hefty fine, one of the largest in history at that time. All right, flash forward 20 more years. Here we are in 2021. Colonial has had a 20-year run worse, far worse than the 20 years from 1980 to 2000, which they were sued by the DOJ for. So, knowing all of this, I contacted the Department of Justice Environmental Crimes Division and brought that to their attention. Said, hey, you sued them in 2000 for 20 years of spills. Considering the last 20 years were worse than the previous 20, um, is the DOJ is Colonial Pipeline on their radar? Is the spill on Colonial or on the DOJ's radar? Is there anything you can tell me? And of course, and this is what kind of I always it always weirds me out is because they could just ignore it, right? They could
Hmm.
just ignore your email, but they email you. They say, "Hey, Robbie, good morning. No comment. Thank you." And it always bugs the shit out of me, right? So, and here's
Yeah.
the thing: is that obviously no comment, an issuance of no comment
I picture
is
Mueller writing that email for some
yeah
reason.
is meant to elicit a neither confirm nor deny type stance.
Hmm.
But and here's the thing, and I think that we should definitely keep an eye on it, even though they say no comment. I think that's telling you more than just ignoring an email, right?
Hmm.
But and this is just speculation, of course. There's two reasons why you'd issue a no comment if you're the DOJ right now, and that's one, it's not on your radar, you don't care, you don't want to talk about it, dismiss it. But again, in my opinion, it's easier to just ignore the email, especially from a nobody reporter like me. I'm not somebody from the New York Times or something, you know. So, and then of course, there's the other thing is that it actually is on your radar and you are maybe working on something coming down the pipe, no pun intended.
Mm.
And you definitely cannot talk about it, obviously. Um,
Right.
so
I think at $1.3 billion a year, it's on their radar.
I would hope so.
Here's the thing, and that's what I'm thinking, Jesse, is that I would not be surprised. And look, this cyber attack thing is going to kind of throw a wrench into things because say the DOJ was planning a surprise lawsuit on Colonial coming in the next few months. I'm sure that they would want to wait until Colonial gets their new numbers, or possibly until state and federal regulators wrap up their investigation of the Huntersville spill completely, before they make a move on any kind of lawsuits from the DOJ. So I mean, we could still be far, like months and months away from this if it were to even happen at all. But it would be odd to see maybe the DOJ having to represent them as, help them out in the case of the cyber attack, while at the same time prosecuting them,
suing them
for the environmental crimes.
It would be interesting to see if there are any direct connections between anybody at Colonial and anybody in the DOJ.
I'm sure there are, investment wise.
That's
question.
Fantastic question, Jesse. Yeah,
thank
you for
we
asking
should look
me
into
that.
Yeah.
Well, I'll let you know
now
by the
Robbie's
end of the
got
night.
homework.
Yeah.
You just gave Robbie some homework.
Yeah.
Good job, Jesse.
But yeah,
he's gonna be up all night now.
Yeah. No, well, I'm up all night anyway. But
I know
I
you
guess
are.
long story short, I guess like the Colonial spill is being overshadowed by the attack. When it was just, at first outright being ignored. Now it's just not, Colonial's in the spotlight, but still, eerily enough, nobody's talking about the spill, which is still a very developing story. I guess things to watch for, just to sum it all up, what we're watching for May 28th. Again, that's the deadline for Colonial to have their new estimates in. We could have a history-making number at that point. Maybe people will pay attention then. Who knows?
Maybe.
Because
May 28th, we need to have you back on for that.
Well, once Colonial started trending on Twitter, it was funny. Everybody came out of the woodwork and wanted to talk about Colonial Pipeline. So maybe maybe once it becomes popular again, maybe they'll want to talk about it. I think that was the most disheartening thing I saw about all of it.
Yeah.
I mean, it was just like, you guys have ignored Colonial Pipeline. Like, I saw people that I had personally talked to,
reached out to
off the record, about this stuff, and was just completely written off. And then, of course, when it starts trending and the pipeline hack and the shutdown, now we're all experts on Colonial Pipeline. And I was like, where the fuck have you been?
Same with Palestine too.
It's like that with everything.
Well,
it's like that with
a
everything.
cycle, though. Yeah, but you're right. With specifically with the Israeli-Palestinian, just absolute debacle. Everybody's an expert every few years. Every time there's
I see people's tweets, right, and automatically they're experts, and
they don't talk about it.
I often wonder, have you ever even been to a march in solidarity with Palestinians?
I'm not gonna put it to that, because not everybody can march. I'm not gonna put it to that. But do you ever talk about it until it's like all of a sudden you're gonna get clicks for it or whatever?
Right.
No. That's what annoys me. If you've covered Palestine like once in the past 10 years, and then now all of a sudden you want to cover it 3 times a week, I'm going to side eye you about that. But I know you have to go, Robbie.
Yeah.
I would love to have you back on after we get the numbers on the 28th, for sure. But yeah, do you want to tell everybody where they can find you on Twitter and all that stuff, Medium, all that good stuff?
Yep. You guys, again, thanks for having me on. And I'll love to come back anytime you guys want me. But yeah, for guys out there watching, if you want to see where I do most of my breaking news and most of my activity is going to be on Twitter. I do some long form articles every once in a while. They are sporadic, but if you want to check them out, that's over on Rockfin. Both names are the same: Roblet O Fire, ROBLETO Fire. And before I get out of here, as always, if any of the people watching tonight, you got any free time on your hands and you need something to do later on, I encourage everybody to just pick up any kind of literature that they can and just try to educate themselves on the effects of autism, so we can build a more accepting, educated, and inclusive world for our neurodiverse brothers and sisters out there. And with that, that's all from me tonight, guys. So, thanks for having me on. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Robbie.
Yeah, thanks, Robbie. We appreciate all your work on this.